Finn stepped off the transport shuttle and looked up at the Galactic Youth Integration Academy for the first time. It was enormous. The building stretched wide in every direction, with tall glass walls that caught the light of two suns hanging low in the pale sky. Students moved through the front gates in groups, tall ones, small ones, ones with 4 arms and ones with no arms at all. Some had scales. Some had fur. Some moved in ways that made no sense to human eyes. Finn stood still for a moment with his bag over one shoulder and just watched. Then he picked up his bag, straightened his jacket, and walked inside. The registration hall was loud and busy. Alien students pushed past each other in every direction. A few of them stopped and stared at Finn openly. He was used to it. Humans were still new to most parts of the galaxy. He was not the first human to attend this academy, but there were not many before him either. He kept his eyes forward and found the registration desk without any trouble. The staff member at the desk was a short, round creature with pale blue skin and 3 fingers on each hand. She checked Finn's name on her screen, printed a small card, and handed it to him without looking up. He found his classroom on the 2nd floor. When he pushed the door open, the room went quiet for just a second. About 30 students sat in rows of curved seats that wrapped around a low central platform. Most of them turned to look at him. Finn nodded once and found an empty seat near the middle. He put his bag down, pulled out a small notebook, and waited. The instructor came in shortly after. Her name was Drava. She was Velan, tall and thin, with long fingers and pale gray skin that had a faint shimmer to it under the classroom lights. She wore a dark blue teaching robe and moved with the kind of calm that said she had been doing this for a long time. She set her materials on the platform, looked around the room, and smiled when her eyes landed on Finn. "We have a new student today," she said. Her voice was clear and warm. "His name is Finn. He comes from Earth. I hope everyone will make him feel welcome." A few students nodded. Most just looked at him again. Finn gave a small wave and said nothing. Drava moved into the lesson quickly and Finn was glad for it. He did not like being looked at. He opened his notebook and started writing. He was halfway through the first lesson when he felt it. It was not a sound or a movement. It was more like pressure, the feeling of being watched by something large. Finn kept his pen moving on the page but let his eyes shift slowly to the left side of the room. There was a group of 3 students sitting together near the far wall. They were Kroth, a species Finn had read about before coming here. Broad and heavy, with thick necks, wide flat faces, and skin the color of dark stone. The Kroth home world had high gravity and the species had been built by it. Even the young ones were heavy with muscle. The one in the middle was bigger than the other 2. He sat low in his seat with his thick arms crossed and his dark eyes fixed on Finn with an expression that was not curiosity. It was something else. Something that measured and calculated and had already come to a conclusion. His name, Finn would learn later, was Gorv. Finn did not look away immediately. He held the gaze for just 1 second, long enough to show he had noticed, not long enough to make it a challenge. Then he looked back down at his notebook and kept writing. Gorv said nothing. But the weight of his attention did not move. The rest of the lesson passed without incident. Drava was a good teacher, clear, patient, and careful to explain things in a way that worked for students from different worlds. Finn found himself genuinely interested in the material. He asked one question near the end of class, a simple one about the topic, and Drava answered it with a smile that said she appreciated students who paid attention. When the lesson ended and students began gathering their things, Finn heard a low sound from across the room. It was not quite a laugh. It was more like the beginning of one, short and quiet, shared between the 3 Kroth students as they looked in his direction. Finn zipped up his bag. He had heard sounds like that before. Back on Earth, in school, before he had learned what he eventually learned. He knew exactly what that sound meant. It meant that someone had decided something about him without knowing anything about him. It meant that someone had looked at his size and his quiet manner and his calm face and had already written the ending of a story in their head. Finn stood up, put his bag over his shoulder, and walked to the door. As he passed into the hallway he did not look back at Gorv. There was no need. He already had all the information he needed. He had seen the way Gorv sat, comfortable, certain, completely sure of himself. He had seen the way the other two looked to Gorv before they reacted to anything. He had seen the expression on Gorv's face when their eyes met. Finn had met this situation before. The details were different. The species was different. The building was different. But the situation was exactly the same. He found a quiet bench near a window at the end of the hall and sat down to review his notes before the next lesson. Outside the window, the two suns were climbing higher. The campus was wide and green and full of alien students moving between buildings. Finn opened his notebook. He was not angry. He was not afraid. He simply waited. The second day started quietly. Finn arrived early, found his seat, and had his notebook open before most other students walked in. He kept to himself during lessons, ate alone during the meal break, and moved through the academy halls without drawing attention. He was good at that. He had always been good at that. Gorv let the second day pass without incident. The third day was different. Finn was walking through the main corridor after morning lessons when he heard heavy footsteps behind him. He did not speed up. He kept his pace steady and even. The footsteps got louder and then Gorv stepped around from the side and planted himself directly in Finn's path. Finn stopped. Gorv was even bigger up close. He stood nearly a full head taller than Finn and twice as wide. His arms were crossed and his flat face carried an expression of complete ease. Behind him stood his two usual companions, watching with quiet amusement. The corridor was busy. Students moved around them on both sides, some slowing down to look. Gorv said nothing at first. He simply stood there, blocking the path, and looked down at Finn the way someone looks at something small and unimportant that has ended up in the wrong place. Finn looked up at him. He did not step back. He did not look away. He said, in a calm and even voice, "Excuse me." Gorv did not move. A few students nearby had stopped completely now. Gorv glanced at them once, enjoying the audience. Then he looked back at Finn and smiled slowly. It was not a friendly smile. He stepped aside after a long moment, but as Finn moved past him, Gorv's shoulder shifted just enough to knock into Finn and push him sideways into the wall. It looked almost like an accident. It was not an accident. Laughter came from the two companions. A few other students nearby joined in, more out of nerves than anything else. Finn steadied himself against the wall. He adjusted his bag. He kept walking. He did not look back. The meal break that day came 2 hours later. The dining hall was large and filled with long tables where students sat in loose groups sorted mostly by species. Finn carried his tray to an empty section near the far end and sat down. He had just picked up his utensil when he heard the familiar sound of heavy footsteps on the hard floor. Gorv walked past Finn's table without slowing down. His arm swung out as he passed. It connected with the edge of Finn's tray and sent it spinning off the table. The food hit the floor. The tray clattered loudly. The section of the hall nearest to them went quiet. Gorv stopped and turned around with wide eyes and his hands raised, performing surprise for the watching students. "Careful," he said loudly. "Humans are clumsy." More laughter. More faces turned toward Finn. Finn looked at the food on the floor. He looked at his empty table. Then he stood up, picked up the tray, and walked back to the serving counter to get another meal. He did not say a word. He did not look at Gorv. He came back, sat down, and ate. The watching students slowly turned away. Gorv stood for a moment longer, expecting something: anger, embarrassment, tears. He got none of it. The lack of reaction flickered across his face as something close to irritation before he moved on. It continued through the week. Gorv made comments in the hallway loud enough for everyone to hear. He said humans were the weakest species to ever apply for academy enrollment. He said their small soft bodies were proof that Earth had never produced anything worth paying attention to. He said Finn in particular looked like something a Croth child could knock over with one finger. Students laughed. Some because they thought it was funny. Some because laughing was easier than not laughing. Finn heard every word. He sat through every comment with the same expression, quiet, steady, and completely unreadable. He did not argue. He did not explain himself. He did not look upset. This was the part that bothered Gorv most. He had done this before with other students and it always followed the same pattern. Push once, get a reaction, establish the order of things, move on. Finn was not following the pattern. Every time Gorv expected fear or anger he got stillness instead. And that stillness made him push harder. Instructor Drava had noticed by the third day. She was experienced enough to recognize the shape of what was happening. She had seen versions of it many times in 11 years of teaching at the academy. She watched the way Gorv moved near Finn. She watched the way Finn responded. She pulled Gorv aside after class on the fourth day and spoke to him in a measured and serious tone. Gorv listened with a polite expression that meant nothing. That evening Drava filed a formal report with the Academy Conflict Office and requested a mediation session. It was standard process. The conflict officer, an eldership named Praxis, received the report and scheduled a meeting for the following week. It was the right thing to do. It would not be fast enough. Because on the morning of the fifth day, Gorv had run out of patience with Finn's silence. He had shown the whole school that the human could be knocked around and mocked without consequence. But Finn's face, that same calm, unreadable face every single time, had started to feel like something Gorv could not stand. He decided the training yard during free period would be the place. He decided today would be the day. And across the academy, completely unaware of what Gorv had decided, Finn walked to the training yard with his bag over one shoulder and his notebook under his arm, thinking about the morning lesson. He was still not angry. He was still not afraid. But somewhere underneath the calm, something had been paying attention to every single day of the past week, cataloging every move Gorv made, every habit, every pattern. Finn was ready. The training yard was wide and open. It sat at the back of the academy building, paved with flat gray stone and bordered on three sides by low walls. Students used it during free period to move around, sit in groups, or practice whatever physical activity their species preferred. On most days it was noisy and relaxed. Finn had found a quiet spot near the far wall. He sat on the low stone edge with his notebook open on his knee and his bag beside him. The sun was warm. The yard was filling up with students coming out after the morning block of lessons. He was reading back over his notes from class and thinking about nothing in particular. He heard Gorv before he saw him. Not because Gorv was loud this time. It was the opposite. The usual noise of the yard dropped slightly, just enough, just for a second, the way noise drops when something shifts in a crowd and people start paying attention to the same thing without deciding to. Finn closed his notebook slowly. He did not look up yet. Then the shadow fell over him. Gorv stood a few steps away with his two companions just behind him and to the sides. Around them, students had already begun to notice and were turning to watch. A loose circle was forming without anyone planning it. That was how these things always started. Gorv looked down at Finn with the expression of someone who had already decided how the next 2 minutes were going to go. "Still writing in your little book," Gorv said. Loud enough for the circle of students to hear. Finn looked up. He looked at Gorv's face, then at the two behind him, then back at Gorv. He closed the notebook the rest of the way and set it on top of his bag. He stood up. He was calm and unhurried about it, the way someone stands up from a bench when their break is simply over. He was still shorter than Gorv by a significant amount. "You should go back inside," Finn said. His voice was quiet and even. "Free period is almost over." Gorv stepped closer. Close enough that Finn had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "I want to see something," Gorv said. "I want to see what a human does when there is no instructor watching." Finn said nothing. Gorv shoved him. Both hands, flat against Finn's chest, hard enough to send him stumbling back 2 full steps. A sound went through the watching crowd. Not quite a gasp. Something between surprise and anticipation. Finn found his footing. He stood still for a moment. Then he looked back at Gorv and said one more time, with exactly the same tone as before, "Stop." Gorv smiled. It was the smile of someone who had never been stopped by a quiet voice in his life. He pulled his right arm back and threw his punch. It was not a small punch. Gorv had the weight of a Kroth body behind it, dense muscle and heavy bone built by generations on a high-gravity world. It was the kind of punch that had ended confrontations before they properly started. Wide, fast, and carrying enough force to put almost anyone on the ground. Almost anyone. What happened next took 4 seconds. Students who were watching would spend a long time afterward trying to describe it and finding that words did not quite fit. Finn moved. Not back. Not sideways. He moved forward and slightly to the inside, stepping into the space beside Gorv's extending arm rather than away from it. The punch went past him. In the same motion, Finn's hand came up and made contact with Gorv's arm, not stopping it, not fighting against it, but following it, guiding it slightly further in the direction it was already going. Gorv's own momentum pulled him forward. Then Finn's hip turned. His weight dropped. His other arm came across and connected with Gorv's upper body in a motion that was less like a strike and more like a redirect. It used Gorv's forward movement like a door uses a hinge. Gorv's feet left the ground for just a moment. Then he was on his back. The sound he made when he hit the stone was loud and flat and final. The training yard went completely silent. Finn was standing over him. His feet were set. His hands were open and relaxed at his sides. He was not in a fighting stance. He was simply standing. His breathing was slow and easy, the same as it had been before any of this started. Gorv lay on the grey stone and stared up at the sky. It took him several seconds to understand what had happened. His 2 companions had not moved. The watching students had not moved. Nobody in the circle made a sound. Gorv turned his head and looked at Finn. Finn looked back at him. Then he bent slightly and held out his hand. Gorv stared at the hand. He did not take it. He rolled to the side and pushed himself up off the ground, slowly, and backed away 2 steps. His eyes did not leave Finn. The expression on his face was something that had never been there before, not anger, not embarrassment, but something quieter and more unsettled than either of those things. The crowd began to murmur. Instructor Drava came through the far entrance of the yard at a fast walk, pushing through the edge of the gathered students. She had seen the crowd forming from the window of the staff corridor and had come immediately. She stepped into the open space and stopped. She saw Gorv on his feet but unsteady, staring at the human student. She saw Finn standing still, his hand now lowered back to his side, his face carrying that same expression it always carried. She looked at the stone where the impact had clearly just happened. She had arrived too late. Drava stepped between them and looked at both of them for a long moment. Then she said, in a firm and steady voice, "Both of you. Come with me." Finn picked up his notebook and his bag from the low wall. He followed without a word. He had not thrown a single punch. He was not breathing hard. The conflict office was a small and quiet room. It sat at the end of a long hallway on the academy's third floor, away from the noise of classrooms and corridors. The walls were a pale cream color. There were 4 chairs arranged around a low table and a single wide window that looked out over the academy gardens. It was the kind of room designed to make people feel calm whether they wanted to or not. Praxis was already there when they arrived. He was old, even by Shen standards. The Shen were a long-lived species, thin and slow-moving, with wide gray eyes and skin the color of dry sand. Praxis had been the academy conflict officer for longer than most of the current staff had been alive. He sat in his chair with his hands folded on the table and looked at Finn and Gorv as they came through the door without any particular expression on his face. Instructor Drava came in behind them and closed the door. They all sat down. Praxis looked at Gorv first. He asked him, in a slow and patient voice, to describe what had happened in the training yard. Gorv was quiet for a moment. Then he described it. He left out the days before. He left out the shove. He said there had been a confrontation and that the human had put him on the ground. Praxis listened without interrupting. Then he looked at Finn. Finn described everything from the beginning. Not with anger and not with any intention of making Gorv look bad. He described the blocked corridor and the knocked tray and the comments in the hallway. He described the shove in the yard and the punch that followed it. He described what he did in response. His voice stayed level the whole time, the same quiet and even tone he always used. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Praxis looked at him carefully. "What did you use?" he asked. "What you did in the yard." "It was a technique of some kind." "Yes," Finn said. "It is called judo." Praxis had not heard the word before. He tilted his head slightly. "Explain it." Finn thought for a moment about how to say it simply. Then he said, "Judo is a human discipline. It was developed a long time ago on Earth. The idea behind it is not to fight force with force. When someone pushes or punches, instead of pushing back, you use their own movement against them. You redirect where they are already going. Their energy does the work, not yours." Praxis was quiet. He was thinking. "The goal," Finn continued, "is never to hurt the other person more than necessary. The goal is to stop the situation. To end it as quickly and as cleanly as possible." Instructor Drava, who had been sitting to the side with her hands in her lap, looked at Finn with an expression he did not fully see because he was looking at Praxis. Gorv had not said anything since his first account. He was sitting back in his chair with his thick arms loose at his sides and his eyes on the low table. He did not look angry. He looked like someone who was thinking very hard about something and had not yet finished. Praxis asked Finn a few more questions. He asked how long Finn had been studying judo. Finn said since he was 6 years old. He was now 17. Praxis did a quiet calculation and said nothing about the result. He asked Finn if he had intended to hurt Gorv. Finn said no. He said the technique he used was specifically chosen because it ends a confrontation without striking. Gorv was on the ground but he was not injured. That was the point. Praxis nodded slowly. Then he looked at Gorv again and asked if he had anything to add. Gorv was quiet for a long time. The room waited. When Gorv finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual and had something in it that had not been there before. He did not apologize. He was not ready for that yet. But what he said was not what anyone in the room expected. He looked across the table at Finn and said, "How did you do it?" It was not quite a question. It was closer to something that had been sitting in his chest since he hit the ground and had finally come out. Finn looked at him. "Show me," Gorv said. "How you moved like that. How you used my weight." He paused. "I want to understand it." Nobody spoke for a moment. Praxis looked at Finn. Instructor Drava looked at Finn. Gorv looked at Finn. Finn said, I can explain the basics. The full thing takes years to learn properly. Gorv said, start with the basics. There was something genuine in it. Not a trick and not a performance. The Kroth respected physical ability above almost everything else. What Finn had done in the yard had not humiliated Gorv in the way Gorv had expected to feel. It had impressed him in a way he did not have the right words for yet. Praxis decided the formal part of the meeting was effectively over. He told them both that he would be documenting the incident and that there would be follow-up conversations. He looked at Gorv for a moment longer than he looked at Finn. After the two students left, Instructor Drava stayed behind. She asked Praxis if she could request Finn's full physical training history from the Earth Registry. Praxis said that was her right as his academy instructor. She submitted the request from her communicator before she left the building. The file arrived that evening. She sat at her desk after dinner with a cup of warm tea and opened the document. It was longer than she expected. Training records going back 11 years. Gradings and assessments and instructor notes from 4 different teachers. Competition records. A short report from a youth program on early human physical development and its relationship to disciplines like judo. She read every single page. When she finished it was late and her tea was cold. She sat for a while looking at the wall and thinking about the 4 seconds in the training yard and what they actually meant. Then she opened a new document and began to write. 3 weeks passed quietly. Finn went to his lessons. He ate his meals. He walked the academy corridors the same way he always had, unhurried, observant, carrying his notebook under his arm. The other students looked at him differently now. Not with the casual curiosity of the first day. With something else. Something that was not quite awe but was close to it. Gorv did not bother him again. They passed each other in the hallways a few times. Gorv looked at Finn each time with that same expression he had worn in the conflict office, the one that was still working something out. He did not speak and neither did Finn. But the weight that had been in those hallway moments before was gone. Something had shifted between them, quietly and without ceremony, the way things sometimes shift after something true has been shown. Instructor Drava spent those 3 weeks doing 2 things. She taught her regular classes with the same calm and patience she always brought to them. And in the hours between, she worked on something new. On a Monday morning 3 weeks after the training yard incident, a notice appeared on the Academy's student information board. It was simple and short. It announced a new elective class beginning that same week. The class was called Human Physical Disciplines. It was open to all enrolled students regardless of species or physical background. The first session would be held in the main activity hall on Thursday at midday. By Tuesday the elective was full. Drava had expected interest. She had not expected the list to fill in less than 2 days. She added a second session on Friday and that filled quickly too. She stood in her office looking at the registration numbers and felt something she had not felt in a long time in her teaching career. Surprise. Thursday came. The main activity hall was a large open space with a high ceiling and a wide padded floor used mostly for group movement activities. When Finn arrived, the room was already nearly full. Students sat in a loose arrangement across the floor, Kroth and Velan and Shen and 4 other species Finn had been slowly learning the names of. Some were large. Some were small. All of them were watching the door when he came in. Finn stopped just inside the entrance and looked at the room. He had not expected this many. Drava was standing near the front. She gave him a small nod. Finn walked to the center of the floor, set his bag down, and looked around at the gathered students. In the front row, sitting cross-legged on the padded floor with his thick arms resting on his knees, was Gorv. He was not with his 2 companions. He had come alone. He sat straight and his eyes were on Finn with an expression of complete attention. Finn looked at him for just a moment. Then he looked at the rest of the room and began. He started with words, not movement. He spoke simply and slowly so that the translator systems every student used could keep up without losing meaning. He explained that judo was one of many human physical disciplines developed over thousands of years on Earth. He explained that humans, compared to many species in the galaxy, were not the largest or the strongest. They did not have the heaviest bones or the densest muscle. What they had developed instead were systems. Ways of thinking about force and movement and balance that allowed a smaller body to work with what was already happening rather than against it. He said the central idea of judo was simple. You do not fight the force coming at you. You receive it, redirect it, and use it. The room was very quiet while he spoke. Then he asked for a volunteer. Several hands went up across the room. Finn picked a mid-sized Velan student near the left side. He spent the next several minutes walking through a basic entry and redirect in slow motion, explaining each step as he went. Where his feet were. Where his hands made contact. How his hip created the pivot point. How the Velan student's own forward movement did most of the actual work. He did it at full speed once at the end. The Velan student was on the mat and back on his feet before most of the room had fully processed what they had seen. Laughter broke out, warm and amazed, not unkind. The Velan student stood up grinning and immediately asked to try again. The session moved quickly after that. Finn worked through 3 more techniques, each one built on the same principle. Redirect, use the energy, end the situation cleanly. He answered questions as they came. Some questions were technical. Some were philosophical, students asking why humans had developed a system focused on not causing unnecessary harm. Finn answered those ones carefully and honestly. He said he thought it came from a very old human understanding that most conflicts did not need a winner and a loser. They just needed to stop. The session ended. Students began standing and gathering themselves, talking among themselves in low excited voices. Finn picked up his bag and was checking that his notebook was inside when he heard footsteps crossing the padded floor toward him. He looked up. Gorv stopped in front of him. He was quiet for a moment, the way he had been quiet in the conflict office. Then he spoke. He said he was sorry. For the corridor. For the tray. For the yard. He said it plainly and without decoration and looked at Finn directly while he said it. He did not look like someone who had been told to apologize. He looked like someone who had spent 3 weeks arriving at something on his own and had finally got there. Finn looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "All right." Not dramatically. Not coldly. Just simply, the way you accept something real. He held out his hand. Gorv looked at it. The same hand that had been held out in the training yard and refused. This time he took it. At the doorway, Instructor Drava watched the 2 of them standing together in the middle of the empty hall. She stayed there for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she walked back to her office, sat down at her desk, and opened the academy curriculum document. She had been thinking about what to change and how to change it for 3 weeks. She had known since the night she finished reading Finn's training file exactly what the curriculum was missing. She began to type. She did not stop until it was done.